Barbara Thompson. So welcome, Peter.
Thanks, everybody. I actually lived here for about a year and a half, a while back with my dad. He was back in 1983 or 84. I haven't spent too much time there since. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Like Lynn McMahon, I'm not a politician, or I've never held elected office. I've never sought elected office. I run a small business. I run a brokerage firm. I'm based out in Westport, Connecticut. I have 6 offices around the country, probably about 30 employees here in the state of Connecticut. The rest, about 100, spread around the other offices around the state. I got into the race. I was the last candidate to announce. Yes, the good news is when I started, I was in 5th place. Now I'm in 3rd, moving up. If I can just get Linda and Rob to drop out, I'll have this whole thing sewn up. But I got into the race mainly out of concern as a private citizen for what was going on in the economy. And I know that, unlike most of the elected officials, I understand the problem and I know what the solution is. Because unlike everybody else, I pretty much predicted everything that happened in 2008 in specific and exact detail. I did it in a book that I wrote. Came out in February of 2007 called Crash Proof. Had a profit from the coming economic collapse, in which I laid out the scenario that was about to unfold. I did it on television. I started appearing on national television in 2005. I was a regular guest on CNBC. They nicknamed me Dr. Doom. I was on generally once or twice a week. I was a regular on Fox News, on Bloomberg, on CNN. Pretty much sounding the warning bell. When people like Ben Bernanke was on television telling everybody how everything was great and how problems were contained in subprime and we weren't going to have a recession and housing prices were never falling, I was out there laying it out, saying exactly what was going to happen to our financial system, to our banking system, to our economy, and I pretty much hit every nail on the head. And when I made a lot of my predictions about the bursting of the housing bubble and the ensuing severe recession and the collapse of our financial system, my real fear as an American was not that collapse. I knew that was inevitable. My fear was what the government was going to do in response. And unfortunately, everything that I wrote and feared that the government would do, they're doing it. And I think that somebody needs to be in Washington to prevent the next round of stimulus from taking place, because that will be the end of it. That will be the toxin that completely destroys the economy. Because what very few people seem to understand is they've confused the disease and the cure. The problems in our economy is that the government interfered too much in the free market. The Federal Reserve was the biggest offender, but the government also played a role. But the government, the Federal Reserve, routinely kept interest rates much too low. And the consequences of having interest rates too low and money too loose was that there was a lot of wild speculation that took place on Wall Street, on Main Street, because money was too cheap. And there were consequences of that. And the consequences were a stock market bubble in the 1990s and then a bigger real estate bubble in 2000. And when these bubbles burst, these malinvestments are exposed, and the market works to repair the damage. And when that happens, you have this recession. You have asset prices falling back to realistic levels. You have resources that need to be reallocated. The recession is often painful, but it's always necessary, because the real problem is the phony boom that is always the consequence of government policy. And so what happens is the government creates this phony prosperity. And when the market tries to correct it, the government tries to rescue the economy with more of the very stimulus that created the problem in the first place. And that's what we're doing right now. The government is doing the equivalent of throwing gasoline on a fire. When George Bush was elected in 2000, he inherited the bursting NASDAQ bubble, which was created by the Fed. When that bubble burst and we had a recession, George Bush and Alan Greenspan decided that they were not going to allow that recession to run its natural course, because it would have been painful, because the bust is always proportionate to the boom. We had a lot of problems that we needed to purge from our economy. That would have been healthy. But instead of that, the government acted to stimulate, to try to spare us the pain of the recession.
and they set up the housing bubble. They slashed interest rates down to 1%. They ran up the deficits to about $300 billion a year. And we had 5 or 6 years of false prosperity as Americans took all that cheap money and we went on a global spending spree. We spent trillions of dollars buying stuff we couldn't afford, that we didn't make. We bought houses we couldn't afford. We spent money remodeling them. We went on this spending binge because we were under the influence of the alcohol that we were being force-fed by the government. We did a lot of stupid, foolish things. And when that bubble finally burst in 2007, we now were confronted with a much bigger recession than the one we would have had in 2001, 2002, if the government had stayed out and let the free market function. Unfortunately, Barack Obama is doing exactly what George Bush did. And Ben Bernanke is doing exactly what Alan Greenspan did, except we're repeating the mistakes on a bigger scale. The stimulus is much bigger. Instead of setting interest rates at 1%, now they're 0. Instead of running $300 billion deficits, they're $1.5 trillion, they're $2 trillion. We've gone off the charts. So the question that we have to wonder is, what financial disaster is the government in the process of creating now? Right? Because it's the stimulus that sows the seeds of the next collapse. And what I think is going to happen during the term of whoever wins this Senate election is this financial crisis is going to become a currency crisis. And that is going to be significantly worse. You see, as the government is creating all this money to bail everybody out, to pretend that nobody's lost money, to keep insolvent banks in business, to keep bankrupt companies operating, to try to create phony jobs and pay for all these programs, they are creating money. They are printing money. They are debasing the value of the dollar. You can already see it in the marketplace. The dollar hits a new record low each day. Gold today over $1,200 an ounce. It continues to rise. The price of gold is not going up. It's the value of our money that's going down. And we need more and more money to buy gold. And we're going to need more and more money to buy food. We're going to need more money to buy energy. The cost of living for average Americans is just going to go ballistic. When the President Obama says that it's just the rich who are going to pay for the stimulus, it's not the rich. It's every American. It's everybody who has savings. Everybody who thinks they're going to be retired. Anybody who has an annuity, life insurance. If you're working for wages and you're earning dollars, you're going to pay a huge tax for this massive expansion of the United States government. And unfortunately, the bigger the government gets, the more it suffocates the real economy. Now, they had a summit today on job creation. The president wants to know why we can't create jobs. He's the reason there's no jobs. Congress is the reason there's no jobs. Jobs come from entrepreneurs. They come from capital, and they come from a profit potential. And the government is taking away the potential for profit with regulations and taxes, and they're destroying capital. They're destroying capital by inflating it away. They've got interest rates at 0. Who in their right mind is going to save any money when interest rates are 0? But if there's no savings, there's no capital. And if there's no capital, there's no jobs. But they don't understand that. All they care about, and I saw in the news today, they had a report, and the president was showing a couple of companies where the stimulus money or his programs saved some jobs or created some jobs. And they make a big deal of showing some people at work, and they say this is because of the government stimulus. But what they don't show you is all the jobs that were destroyed to save those jobs. The government doesn't have any resources. They have nothing. They have a printing press, but they don't have any resources. And when they create jobs in one part of the economy, they have to destroy them someplace else because they have to divert resources from those other areas. But what happens is we destroy efficient jobs and we create less efficient jobs, or in some cases, jobs that have no productive value whatsoever. And the government doesn't understand the difference between a job and productivity. People don't want jobs to work. I mean, everybody in the Soviet Union had a job. All the slaves had jobs. I mean, there's nothing great about having a job. The key is to have a job that pays you a salary where you can buy things, where you're actually productive, where and we're destroying those kind of jobs. And as we continue to create money to finance all these bailouts, whether it's to bail out, Wall Street firms, or to bail out, General Motors or Chrysler, whoever's getting this money, all this money is being printed, and it has a huge cost. And what's going to happen in this next crisis is the rest of the world, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Saudis, the Europeans, the Latin Americans, they're the ones that have been buying all this debt. They're the ones that have been loaning us all this money.